In 2019, I bought my very first property, and it was a great experience. Now, it's going downhill from here. Hi everyone, it's Ndao. Welcome back to another video. If you haven't seen my previous videos, go ahead and watch those, but only after watching this. Cool. I've been meaning to make this video for a while. This is actually the second time I'm recording this video, but the first one was too long, so I'm just going to jump into it. In 2019, I bought my very first property, and it was a great experience. I'm also now reflecting back and realizing how many blunders, how many mistakes I made, and there are definitely things that I did wrong the first time round. I am willing to admit that. So I am probably going to be buying my second property within the next year or so. So I'm reflecting back on the entire process and trying to think about things that I would have changed, things I would have done differently, and some of the lessons that I've learned. Let's start. First thing I want to mention is that it's never too early to start looking. I think this is something I really did well in the beginning. So I put down a deposit on my home in November 2019, and I started looking for places from Feb of that same year. So before purchasing this place, I was staying at home, and I knew that I wanted to move into my own place at some point in the future. Qualifying as a CA seemed like a reasonable milestone to make that decision. And I'm really, really glad that I took my time and really gave myself time to see what was out there. Something I'm definitely taking forward with me with the next property. Now, it's going downhill from here. Next thing I want to talk about is that I need to enter this process with an open mind. And I will say that I started off okay. I think I really started off good. And when I was looking at properties, I was looking at both existing developments and I was looking at new developments. However, I changed my mind too quickly. I really didn't give existing developments a chance. So what ended up happening is that this dog, if he runs behind me one more time, Loki. So how we got you really was through one viewing. So there was a place in Midrand that I was really interested in. The price was right, the location was right. It just made sense on paper. Then I got to the place and I made the mistake of viewing the place while the people or the occupants were there. The state of that apartment was a mess. Guys, the walls were blue. The ceiling had those stains. The furniture was just off. It was just overcrowded. And the real estate agent kept trying to sell this dream that I couldn't see because that place was just a mess. I was just like, if this is what it's going to be like, if I'm going to have to look at apartments that are in this state constantly, I don't think I can do it. So I think I jumped ship and I think I prematurely moved to only wanting a new development too soon. And you'll understand exactly why this was probably the biggest mistake that I made through this process, almost biggest mistake, because it's been an interesting journey. Next thing I want to talk about is location. So I firstly understand the importance of location. I literally had that at the back of my mind the whole time. And I am happy ultimately with the location that I live in. However, I do think that my purchasing decision was heavily influenced by the trauma I experienced through my commute. So when I was doing articles, I was living in Boksburg, that's where home is, and work was either in Sandton, Midrand, Centurion, Pretoria. And driving that far really took a strain on me. I told myself from the get-go that I don't want to be more than 10 kilometers away from work. And I think in doing that, I closed myself off to a lot of really good areas. I didn't consider Centurion, which I think has great value for money. I didn't consider Kempton Park, Bedford View, even parts of the East Rand. And I really think that I should have weighed things a bit more equally. I think there are other factors that were a bit more important than that. And I think ultimately where I ended up living and work didn't really matter. So, I bought this place. I moved in 2020. The pandemic had already started and we were working from home. I then left the very job that I was trying to center this entire purchase around and worked a fully remote job afterwards. I have not been in the inside of an office in over 2 years. And I know that there was no way to really anticipate that the world would be set on fire. But it's really making me prioritize differently with this next purchase. Next thing I want to talk about is purchasing a new development. I will never do that again. And I will explain why. First thing I want to talk about is that new developments usually come with a lot of infrastructure issues. I remember when I talked to a friend of mine, she also moved into a different complex, but it was also the student res developer. And when I asked her about her experience, she just said, the apartment is great, everything is great, but I don't have electricity. So I'm just like, what do you mean you don't have electricity? She's like, I don't know how to tell you, but like, there's no electricity. So I took that information and I was just like, shame. Miguel has no electricity. So horrible. When I tell you, when I moved here, every Thursday, at least for the first, I want to say 3 to 6 months, there was no electricity. I think part of that is an infrastructure problem. I feel like there are a lot of us here and maybe, there's not enough to go around. The infrastructure isn't enough to go around. But another sort of con that I will segue into is that my current complex is still building. And I think when we moved in, we would get messages like, yo, block X, we're going to switch you off for 2 hours so that we can connect the wires or whatever it is that they're doing. So from an infrastructure position, I think I'd feel more comfortable like knowing what I'm getting myself into, because even with the new development, like there's no places around here. Like there's no kokoting at Makhelwane and asking them what the area is like. It was really, just having to go with my gut, and my gut was almost wrong. I will say though that a really big pro, and this is what sort of keep me going from this whole process, is that I purchased this place very early on in its development. I think I was like phase 1 or phase 2. What that resulted in is a massive discount on the apartment. So right now I have a really good amount of equity in this place, which I think is really, really good. So from a value for money perspective, I think I hit the jackpot. Mara still. So maybe there's like a 1% chance that I would buy a new development. But the biggest condition is that the place must be done. I don't want to see them still laying a brick after I move in. I say this because of 2 things, all right? Number 1, the noise. I just mentioned that I work from home. Y'all, the noise is unbearable. It is insane. Number 2, the dust. I got to a point where I had to ask the property managers to move my car, because my car was always dirty. Like I would have to wash my car every 2 days because of all the dust and all the dirt it was gathering. So, guys, and maybe those things are trivial, but when you're in that situation and those are your living conditions, you start to realize what's important. And I ain't doing that again. Another thing I want to mention that I almost botched was interest rates. So I didn't get pre-approval for this property. That was unwise. I got lucky though in the end. I fought for my interest rate. I was pinning these banks against each other. I was not having it. I think one of the banks were just like prime +2. In what world? In what economy would that actually make sense? So I really think I played the interest rate game right. I even switched banks recently and lowered it even more because the numbers just made sense. So this I would say was the biggest mistake. So gather around. Occupational rent. So let me explain to you. I'm gonna put my phone down because I need to explain to you how this exactly happened. So I got the offer to purchase and it had the clause for occupational rent. And essentially from the time when I get the keys, firstly I'd be liable for levies. And also between that time and when my bond is registered, I would have to pay the developer rent. Sharp. So I spoke to the agent and I was like, I don't like this clause, but like, how long do you think it'll take to register the place? And she was just like, oh no, it'll take like 6 weeks. So what ended up happening is that I was supposed to move in March, but I wasn't in the country. Also, I was supposed to get proxy for my sister to inspect the apartment for me. Another thank you that I didn't do that, because that's when I would have been liable for levies. So what ended up happening is that we went into a lockdown, and I only moved in May. So risk number one is that I could have really signed for the apartment in February, had zero access to it because I wasn't in the country and we're in lockdown, and I would have had to pay levies. Second thing is with the occupational rent. So when I moved in, they decided to waive the occupational rent. I don't know if this was because the developer had already lost money during this lockdown, they just wanted people to at least like move in type of thing, or whatever other reason. Anyway, so they waived the rent, and I was just like, oh, at least I get to breathe for 6 weeks, nyana. It took 6 months. It took a whole 6 months to register my apartment. So, which was amazing because I went 6 months living in this apartment without having to pay an installment. I would have felt like crap having to pay occupational rent because I was never a fan of it in the start. And I wouldn't have anticipated having to pay it for 6 months. And I know going forward, occupational rent might be unavoidable, but I really wish I had put more thought into it than just trusting some lady that said it's gonna take 6 weeks. Another thing I want to talk about is having an exit strategy. So this is also probably a con of living not just in a new development, but a new development that is still developing. If I decide to sell this place, I am competing with the developer. I'm competing with an apartment that is brand new, literally no one's lived there, versus my 2-year-old apartment. Loki. And I think if I was in a situation where I had to sell, it would take me quite a bit of time to do that, especially if it was like an urgent sale where I was like leaving the country. Or Loki, if you carry on. So I think if I was in a position where I had to sell immediately, let's say I was leaving the country or I just had to take my money out of this apartment, it might take me long. And some of these developers, I know the one not so far from the area, like they've been building for like 5 years. I'm only in year 2 now. So I think having a good exit strategy is something that's very, very high priority for me. This also goes very much hand in hand with location. What I've actually been doing is for the areas that I want to live in and even the streets, I've been looking at the trends and how long certain properties have been on the market, just so that I can know how long it would potentially take me to sell the place. Okay, guys, I think that is everything. Many lessons, many mistakes. So I really hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you next time. Bye.